Hello, welcome to another episode of the History of Comic Books podcast. And it's your friendly neighborhood host, JT Wheatley, here again for the concluding chapter of the life of Stan Lee. When we last left off, Stan Lee was about to fall into a full-blown celebrity himself, and a lot of that started with his eventful trip to Carnegie Hall. On December of 1971, Stan Lee appeared at an event at Carnegie Hall in celebration of himself. However, despite the eclectic lineup of guests from actors like Peter Boyle and writer like Tom Wolfe, the audience came out bored and was a complete disaster. Not deterred, though, Lee continued his work promoting Marvel, and it was around this time the phrase House of Ideas was coined. Then, in 1972, he was made president when Martin Goodman left the company and absolutely hated it. While as an editor-in-chief, he dreamed of one day being in control of the finances he had to fight over. Once Stan Lee was put in charge of them, he discovered that's all he did, and he had no creative control whatsoever. He chose instead to focus on being just a publisher of Marvel, while Roy Thomas became Marvel's new editor-in-chief. While Lee still pursued creative avenues, he finished directly writing with The Amazing Spider-Man number 110 on July of 1972, being the last issue he wrote for the series, along with Fantastic Four number 125 of August of 1972, with Jerry Conway taking over both. Nevertheless, he was still worried about Marvel's finances, especially once he saw the books himself. As a publisher, he tried to branch out with Marvel with Crazy in October of 1973, a ripoff of Mad Magazine with the moniker Stan Lee Presents, and Marv Wolfman as editor. Also, as part of the Electric Company TV show, Spidey's Super Stories were produced from 1974 to 1975. In 1976, Stan Lee had Marvel partner with the noted underground comics publisher Kitchen Sink Press with a new venture, Comics Book, but it only lasted 2 issues. Kitchen Sink would later acquire the books for 2 more issues, with the partnership dissolved. Lee also tried another hand at an old love of his, newspaper strips. Over the years, he had created strips like Mrs. Lyons Club and Willie Lumpkin with Jack Kirby, but neither lasted long. Lumpkin would soon become a supporting character in the Fantastic Four, first appearing in issue number 11 on February of 1973, and Stan Lee would even play him in a cameo in the 2005 Fantastic Four movie. On October of 1976, Stan Lee tried again, creating The Virtue of Vera Valiant, a strip with Frank Springer. It was a satire of television soap operas, with the title character being involved in the oddest love triangle, having fallen in love with a man who went into a coma on his honeymoon. It was a mix of Lee's dry wit and madcap sass, along with a bit of the macabre. The opening strip deals with Vera's brother Herbert botching a suicide attempt, and would run for 14 years. In 1977, Lee went with a strip closer to his heart when he started the Spider-Man newspaper strip, which launched in 100 newspapers but soon would reach 400 worldwide by the next year. However, Lee had a hard time writing a daily strip with his many other jobs at Marvel. Nevertheless, his success did prompt the Tribune to ask DC to produce their own strip. Another venture that Stan Lee tried was the Marvel Fireside books with Simon & Schuster Publishing, where they produced 11 books from 1974 to 1977. Among them was The Origins of Marvel Comics in September of 1974 and Superhero Women in 1977, where Lee tried to explain women and characters in comic books. In 1978, a new Fantastic Four cartoon was created, with writing by Stan Lee and Roy Thomas, along with art by Jack Kirby, who had once again returned to the company after his 5-year stint at DC. Kirby even worked with Stan Lee on the Silver Surfer graphic novel The Ultimate Cosmic Experience on September of 1978, published by Fireside Books. However, one expansion of Marvel that Lee hated was the live-action Spider-Man TV series from 1978 to 1979, along with the Captain America TV movie in 1979 as well. He did like the CBS Incredible Hulk show from 1977 to 1982, though. Nevertheless, the influx of comic book TV shows led to Time magazine to speculate in a 1979 article that Stan Lee was responsible for turning TV into one big electronic comic book. Not all was rosy, though, as in 1979 as well, the New York Times ran an article by Anna Kleinfeld that addressed Marvel's financial and creative woes, along with attacking the new editor-in-chief, Jim Shooter. The article did praise Lee as a creative genius, but stated he was beneath comics. Lee would call the article total garbage, but did admit one of the allegations that licensing their products was now more important for the company. Nevertheless, Lee was doing well personally, as his annual salary with Marvel was $150,000 a year, plus the work he was getting with college speeches and TV consulting. With his work moving him away from comic books and more toward TVs and films, Stan Lee decided to move to Hollywood to help further develop them. He even tried his Marvel method on screenlining for films with the Night of the Witch, about a hero witch. He worked with Lloyd Kaufman, the future founder of Troma Entertainment, known for The Toxic Avenger, among others, who he had met at Yale on a speaking tour. The script was picked up for $500, but never made. Lee later tried again with The Man Who Talked to God, but that was never made either, which he had worked with Alan Renee but later admitted it was impossible to adapt. Finally, Lee did set up a Marvel office at 4610 Van Vancies Boulevard in Sherman Oaks with Excelsior, Latin meaning ever upward or still higher, which Lee was using as his trademark phrase, signed at the door. Called Marvel Productions, the new studio teamed with producers such as Fred Silverman, legendary TV producer of Charlie's Angels and Roots, with Lee wanting to focus on cartoons, as he thought that was the best medium for adapting the comic books. Some examples of this was the Meatballs and Spaghetti cartoon, which aired on CBS's Saturday morning cartoon block, along with the Dungeons and Dragons, an animated adaptation of the classic fantasy game. Lee also served as narrator and consultant of the new Spider-Man and Hulk cartoons. Reportedly, Lee hated being a narrator, but the fans loved it, as hearing the actual voice of the creator of Spider-Man and Hulk helped sell the story. Soon, Lee was also pitching demos of comic readers for studios. As a result of the success of the Incredible Hulk TV show, Lee inadvertently returned to comics when he learned that the show was planning to create a female Hulk. Not wanting such a character created outside of Marvel, as the company wouldn't own the copyright, he wrote The Savage Sea-Hulk #1 in February of 1980 with John Buscema doing the art, with her origin being that of the cousin of Bruce Banner, Jennifer Walters, who inherits her cousin's Hulk powers when she receives a blood transfusion from him after being grievously injured. While meant so Marvel could own the character, it was also an attempt to draw female fans to comic books, though it only lasted for 2 issues. By the mid-'80s, Stan Lee was out of the day-to-day operations of Marvel, now carrying the title of Vice President of Creative Affairs. He was also getting $3,000 per appearance for college speaking fees. However, his self-promotion led to some problems when he forgot to acknowledge the co-creators of many of his works, such as Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko. In 1986, he wrote Spidey and Me, an essay about his work on the Spider-Man, which was included in the Best of Spider-Man book of that year. Then, in a brilliant bit of self-promotion, he served as Justice in the Peace to the marriage of Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson at Shea Stadium to a crowd of 55,000 people, who were already on hand to see the reigning World Series champions, the New York Mets, play, of which Peter Parker, being a kid from Queens, was a fan of. New World, Marvel's new owners, also pushed Lee to make numerous public appearances. The company had purchased Marvel from Cadence in 1986, and like the previous deal, required as part of the sale for Stan Lee to be signed to a long-term contract, as he was still seen as the face of Marvel. In 1989, Marvel celebrated its 50th anniversary. Of interesting note, President Ronald Reagan admitted in an interview he enjoyed reading the comic strips in the paper first before getting into deeper stuff, and noted Spider-Man as one of his favorites, which Lee enjoyed. Meanwhile, in 1994, Marvel was bought out once again, and one of the executives, Bill Blevins, named Stan Lee the head of Marvel Films and promptly tripled his salary. That same year, Lee edited The Ultimate Spider-Man, a collection of short stories by a number of different writers. In it, he claimed to have gotten the idea for Spider-Man in watching a spider climbing on a wall and wondered what a superhero would be like with those powers. Lee also revised the origin with Aunt May now having a fear of spiders, while the one that bit Peter was originally in Dr. Otto Octavius' lab, who of course is Dr. Octopus. He did include a dedication to Spider-Man's creator, Steve Ditko, with Dedicated to Steve Ditko, who was there from the beginning. Meanwhile, Stan Lee became friends with James Cameron, the famed director of the Terminator films, who had become interested in making a Spider-Man movie. Unfortunately, Marvel went into bankruptcy in 1996, which scared off many potential studios in developing films of their properties. Cameron did produce a story treatment, which was widely panned when it was leaked on the internet. Lee still continued to work with Marvel in pushing new mediums, this time the emerging internet. However, after decades at Marvel, Stan Lee decided it was time to set out on his own. Thus, on January of 1999, he established Stan Lee Media Incorporated with Peter F. Paul, with a $30 million investment and the intention of starting a whole new comics universe. Marvel wasn't quite ready to let him go, though, and he was made chairman emeritus, but he still felt it was slighted since it was mostly an honorary title. Lee also thought that Ike Perlmutter's, who held the controlling interest in ownership of Marvel at the time, offer was insulting, as it was half his original salary. Ultimately, Marvel realized the value of Lee and not having him go on to rival publisher like DC, so attorney Arthur Lieberman offered a new deal of $800,000 a year plus $125,000 for his Spider-Man strip, along with a $500,000 pension guaranteed to his wife Joanne in the event of his death. On top of all that, he would receive 10% stake in all future film and TV projects. Plus, Lee was allowed an escape clause that allowed him to actually work on other projects outside the company. However, Lee's new business partner, Peter F. Paul, was shady at best, having previously served time in a jail for defrauding the Cuban government in cocaine possession in the 1970s. Originally sentenced to 8 years in prison, he was paroled after serving just 3, but then in 1983 was caught trying to sneak into Canada using a false identity and properly returned to prison. Upon completing his sentence, he moved to California, where he became a business manager to numerous celebrities, such as the romance cover model Fabio, along with being the single largest campaign donor to Hillary Clinton's 2000 senatorial run in New York City. Reportedly, he was trying to get former President Bill Clinton to serve on the Stan Lee Media's board and wooed him with no less than the Hollywood Farewell Gala salute to President William Jefferson Clinton, featuring numerous entertainers and celebrities singing his praises, while also raising $1 million for his wife Hillary's Senate campaign. However, this event would also come back to haunt Paul, as he reported it cost $1.9 million to throw, but the Federal Election Commission estimated it was just $500,000, and much of it fraudulently borrowed from Merrill Lynch. This was just an ominous sign of things to come. Nevertheless, Stan Lee set up a new office in Enrico, California, with Peter F. Paul, and founded StanLeeNet.net. Soon, his new company was part of a reverse merger with Boulder Capital Opportunities Incorporated under the SLEE. Lee received stock of 6 million shares, an annual salary of $272,500. The new company soon had 150 employees. One of the company's first creations was the Seventh Portal, a superhero team tasked with battling villains to a hidden gateway. They were also proposing a clothing line inspired by Stan Lee's many catchphrases. On February 29, 2000, they debuted a website at Raleigh Studios in North Carolina, with Dick Clark hosting along with guests Ray Charles, Jerry Lewis, and Chaka Khan. There was even a plan for 3D rides at Paramount Parks. Soon the company attracted the attention of celebrities like the Backstreet Boys and Mary J. Blige, who would later appear in a cameo in the 2002 Spider-Man movie. In 2000, its shares were valued at $31, with $350 million in total value. During all this, a weird side moment came about when the pop star Michael Jackson wanted to buy Marvel, which is still recovering from bankruptcy, and have Stan Lee run it. Reportedly, he agreed to do it, but the deal was never made. Meanwhile, StanLee.net was reportedly spending $26 million annually compared to $1 million in revenue, showing signs of trouble. By December of 2000, the company was bankrupt and subject to investigation by both the FBI and the SEC. Lee was never the focus of the investigation, as the agent's target was Peter F. Paul. The increased scrutiny did have a negative impact on Lee, who reportedly collapsed due to the stress of the investigation. Stephen McGorder, the vice president of Paul, was also part of the stock swindle and sentenced to 6.5 years in prison. Later, it was revealed that Paul had forged Lee's signature on several documents. On February 16, 2001, the company filed for bankruptcy in the U.S. Bankruptcy Court in the Central District of California. By August of 2002, the company was officially dissolved by the California Secretary of State. Paul fled to Brazil but was imprisoned on August 2001 for 2 years. They finally extradited to the U.S. on September of 2003, accusing of defrauding the company of $25 million. In 2005, he pled guilty and spent 4 years under house arrest. By 2009, he had spent 10 years at a federal institution in Anthony, Texas, before finally being paroled in 2014. While Stan Lee was never implicated in any wrongdoing, the news that came out about his role at the company was placed him in a negative light, with reports of him sleeping through meetings and ignoring company finances. Lee kept going, and in 2001, Stan Lee went to work for Marvel's distinguished competition, DC, a nickname he coined for them decades ago, with Michael Uslan on a series of 13 one-shots called Just Imagine, which Stan Lee would reimagine classic DC characters from Superman to The Flash based only on their names, working with such notable artists as John Buscema, Jim Lee, and Joe Kubert. Grant Morrison would later incorporate the line of the greater DC multiverse into his series The Multiversity in 2014 to 2015, christening them as part of Earth 6. As also in 2001, Stan Lee formed a new company with Joe Champion and Arthur Lieberman called POW, Purveyors of Wonder, to develop film, TV, and video game properties. One notable product that came from this was the cartoon show Stripolella for Spike TV, a cartoon superhero satire about the erotica Jones, voiced by Pamela Anderson, who has a superhero guise as Superella, a superhero secret agent. The series lasted only one season, from June 26, 2003 to April 1st, 2004 for 13 episodes, but received surprisingly positive reviews, noting its tongue-in-cheek humor. In 2004, Lee took POW public. In 2006, Stan Lee Meets was created as a series of one-shots done to celebrate 65 years of working with Marvel, which featured the creator meeting many of his co-creations, written by himself and other notable writers like Joss Whedon. He even guest starred on The Simpsons TV show on April 28, 2002, and with this and his numerous other guest appearances, he received the nickname the King of Cameos, appearing in numerous films and TV shows since. Lee had been doing this for years, notably in the 1995 movie Mallrats, which also started a longtime friendship he would have with the film's director, Kevin Smith. Stan Lee continued to branch out, working with the Sci-Fi Channel on a series like Who Wants to Be a Superhero on July 27, 2006, intending to capitalize on the reality TV show craze at the time. Lasting for 2 seasons and 14 episodes, its premise was that contestants would dress up and present their ideas for a superhero to Stan Lee, with one or more eliminated at the end of the episode. The winner had their character adapted in a Dark Horse comic book, and a trip for the two to Universal Studios Florida to participate in the park's Parade of Superheroes. The series lasted until September 6, 2007, and Lee also produced a children's version on British TV, which ran from January 3rd to April of 2009 for 15 episodes. Stan Lee then created The Condor for Cartoon Network, an animated superhero film that premiered on March 20th, 2007, about a professional skateboarder who developed superpowers when injected with nanotechnology. While working with his old Marvel colleague Mark Wolfman on writing it, the film received mostly negative reviews. Most significantly, Lee started to make his many signature cameos in Marvel movies, from X-Men in 2000 to Spider-Man in 2002. At the 2007 San Diego Comic-Con, Robert Downey Jr., who would play Tony Stark Iron Man in the 2008 Iron Man movie, which would also launch the Marvel Cinematic Universe, introduced Stan Lee to a packed crowd at Hall H. Of course, Lee would have a cameo in Iron Man movie and be featured in every MC movie since, coming to be a trademark of the franchise. However, his old company, Stan Lee Media, came back to haunt him and Marvel when Jim Nesfield, on March 15, 2007, purchased the company and then sued Marvel, claiming that Stan Lee had given up the rights to his characters for stock and a regular salary. On June 9, 2007, Stan Lee Media then sued Lee himself and his new company, POW. These lawsuits were later dismissed. On November 17, 2008, Stan Lee was honored with the National Medal of Arts and Humanities by President George W. Bush. He also received numerous tributes by Roy Thomas and Alter Ego number 74 in December of 2007. Then on December of 2008, Right Now number 18 featured a tribute by Danny Fingeroff. Also in 2008, Lee participated in Stan Lee Presents Election Days, What Are They Really Saying?, a political satire of the 2008 election. In 2009, Lee worked on Time Jumper for POW and Disney, a new web-based comic, which starred Lee Associer, the leader of the Hunt Corporation. On March of 2012, Stan Lee cameoed as himself on The Big Bang Theory. Then, on April 2012, he launched Stan Lee's World of Superheroes on YouTube. He even made a character in the 2012 Amazing Spider-Man game by Activision, while also appearing in Lego's Marvel Superheroes game in 2013. On January 2014, he made another appearance on The Simpsons, and then appeared in Marvel's Lego Superheroes in 2016. Lee even got an action figure in 2016 at $250. Lee continued to produce comics from Stan Lee's Lucky Man on the Sky in January of 2016, and then Nitron in July of that year. Also, in 2016, he launched Stan Lee's Cosmic Crusaders in the Hollywood Reporter to coincide with the 75th anniversary of Marvel. Lee then launched Stan Lee Box with POW, and in October of 2016, he hosted his own convention, Stan Lee's Los Angeles Comic-Con, which was previously Stan Lee's Comic-Kazi in 2012. It was a 3-day celebration of the creator, with Friday being unofficially designated Stan Lee Day. Sadly, on July 6, 2017, his wife Joanne died at the age of 95. After her death, Stan Lee was cared for by their daughter at his $25 million home in Los Angeles, despite recent allegations of elder abuse that had been dismissed after being investigated. While frail, hard of hearing, and with a voice that sometimes failed him, the comic book great remained as sharp as ever, stating in an October 8, 2018 interview to the Daily Beast, the one thing he missed the most was creating. Even after all those decades of crafting some of the finest fiction in world history, Stan Lee still had a few ideas rattling around in his head. Sadly, we would not get those ideas, as Stan Lee passed away November 12, 2018 at the age of 95. It was a day of mourning across the entertainment world, with numerous actors, from Chris Evans to Mark Hamill, to his fellow creators, from Mark to Todd McFarlane to Rob Liefeld, who looked to Stan Lee, noting him as an inspiration to his work and comic books themselves. While Lee wasn't a perfect human being, as no one ever is, he left behind a legacy of characters and stories that still shape the comic book medium and entertainment in general. The MCU franchise is officially the highest-grossing film series in history, at $15 billion and counting, beating out Star Wars, Harry Potter, and James Bond. Most importantly, Meany noted how generous he was to his fellow creators and fans, always treating them with inspiration and kindness. To paraphrase Mark Hamill, the actor who played Luke Skywalker in Star Wars and voiced the Joker in the Batman cartoons, he commented how they say you should never meet your idols. That was not true with Stan Lee, who was everything you wanted and more. Rest in peace, Stan Lee, and thanks for the universe you created that continues to entertain and inspire to this day. I would like to highlight my main source for these episodes in Stan Lee, The Man Behind the Marvel by Bob Batchelor, an excellent biography of the comic book great that covers all the bases. Get it wherever books are sold.
More positive than a New Day pancake. More fun than a super kick party. It's the wrestling podcast from the host, who is the hammer swinging, burrito eating, well, you know the rest, of Thunder Talk. Sexy Thor. It's the Ring of Thunder, found in the Thunderverse and among the great podcasts of the ESO network.
And now it is April 24th, 2025, time for the favorite comic book of the week. Absolute Wonder Woman, number 7 by Kelly Thompson, Matea de Lewis. Apologies if I get that name wrong. This is another great issue that finds Diana trapped in hell, overseen by Hades, who is forcing her to fight in an arena tournament to the death, also trying to give her a possible choice in order to save her mother, Circe. This is another great story by Thompson that really weaves into some great moments of Greek mythology, and I love how she actually does a cool flashback where it goes to Diana as a child being told this story about her mother Circe about when a prince had to make an impossible choice, and how that reflects on her decision today. And also, it's matched by Dale Lewis's gorgeous art, which now has great detail and is action-packed, but has a nice Greek look to it, from the characters to Wonder Woman Diana herself, who, should look like a Greek character. She's an Amazon, so it makes perfect sense. All in all, this is the best of the Absolute line still to this date, which by default makes it one of the best comics in the stands right now. And with that, we will conclude with this reposting of the life of the Stan the Man Lee. Join me again next week for likely it's going to be another archived edition. And until then, go enjoy yourself a good comic book. And definitely check out Absolute Wonder Woman. Seriously, this is the best of the Absolute line right now.